Hello, I'm Dr. Joe Arminio. Welcome to my channel, America Resurgent. In this video, I'm going to explain how the super rich, or at any rate some of them, the billionaires, the oligarchs, could exploit the Iran war, pull off a massive, unfair wealth accumulation. They did this very thing once before in 2020. With the right conditions, they could do it again. Now, after I explain how they could pull off, again, this terrible exploitation, I'm going to explain what we can do to stop this from ever happening again, and how we can have deep, meaningful monetary reform. So stay with me to the end of the video to hear about what we can do to stop this. Now, back in 2020, the super rich, or at any rate some of them, had the right conditions. They had a steep decline in the stock market. They had a steep decline in the economy as a whole. If they get those conditions again, and they just might with the Iran war, they could do what they did in 2020 again. We're talking about receiving from the Federal Reserve a handout, evidently to the sum of $3 trillion. And that's just for starters. Now, to understand how they pulled this off in 2020, we need to understand the Federal Reserve policy called going direct. You probably never heard about it. The elite don't want you to know about it. Well, this going direct was so successful in 2020 that the elite want to make it permanent. And they call the permanent policy revolution. Are they intending to overturn the American Revolution? I fear this is exactly what they have in mind. To better understand going direct and, what is worse, policy revolution, let's take a look at this chart, an approximation of the chart of Warren Buffett's. Warren Buffett will plot the value of the stock market as a whole relative to GDP. So that's what you see here with the black lines. So the vertical axis is percentage of GDP, and the horizontal axis is the year, starting in 1975. And you can see that in general, the stock market's value relative to GDP is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's a sign it's more and more speculative, more frothy. Well, between 1975 and 1995, we see that the valuation is about 50%. There's no major downturns except in the late 80s. That's quickly repaired. We then have the climb toward the dot-com bubble of 2000. That comes apart to 2003 or so. It bottoms. Then we have the rise up to 2008. We remember that year the global financial crisis begins. And we have the crash all the way down to 2009. Now, the important thing to observe about that is that during this period from 1975 to 2009, the federal government doesn't have a specific policy to do in the event of a major downturn. Instead, it will be episodic about things. It will bail out this institution, that institution, as it needs to. And the Federal Reserve doesn't give money directly to the private sector. It works through intermediaries, like it's supposed to, through the Treasury Department, through designated commercial banks, who then in turn will pass it on to the private sector. It's also important to observe that in this period, the one time when you have both a steep decline in the stock market and a steep decline in the economy as a whole is when 2008, the global financial crisis. And yet, there's nothing specific about the government's response. It's episodic. And the Federal Reserve acts through intermediaries. Well, then what happens? Starting in 2009, you see this long, relentless climb in the value of the stock market as a percentage of GDP, way up now to 200% up in 2020. This is the time of first quantitative easing. So interest rates are loans are being offered at virtually no interest rate at all. But then there is the tapering, and then there is the tightening, where interest rates begin to be put up. Why? Raised. Why? Because inflation's now becoming a problem. The Federal Reserve has to do something about inflation. The bubble's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They know that they're coming to the point where there's going to be a bursting of the bubble. Interesting, here in 2019, this is in August of 2019, along comes Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, and he will suggest to the Federal Reserve that a special policy be put in place, a novel special policy in the event of the next major downturn, which the elite have to know is coming. And after all, they're the ones raising the interest rates. They're the ones pricking the bubble. So he calls this special measure going direct. And it will actually be implemented in a very short time, which is in early 2020. So what is going direct? Well, I told you before the Federal Reserve up until that time would go through intermediaries. They would never give money directly to the private sector. All that changes. Going direct means, in effect, that the Federal Reserve will give money into the pockets, put it in the pockets of those in the private sector. Now, not exactly that way, but in effect by a certain subtle arrangement. The three ways I talked about, through which the super rich benefit. So what happens here? Well, one of the three ways. If you're holding a toxic asset and you're a friend of the Fed, you're super rich, you will be able to unload that. The Federal Reserve will take it from you. How nice of the Federal Reserve. What else will the Fed do? Well, they'll also drop in your pocket. They'll put money into the commercial bank that you bank at, who then will be giving you that money. And then that's the second thing they'll do. The third thing is the timing of all this. They'll suggest as the stock market is coming apart, as the general economy is coming apart, they'll suggest that you want to buy this asset or that asset. How nice of them, how nice of the Fed again, to help out its friends. So the three elements will take your toxic assets away, we'll give you an infusion of capital, and we'll give you that infusion just when it's most beneficial, when there's a downturn. Now, speaking of that downturn, this is a crucial part of this, the timing of all this, from another point of view, because going direct also involves deception. I think it does. Why? If people caught on that money was being given to certain individuals, especially super rich, especially at a bad moment like that, that would not be a good thing. So you need a distraction. And that's where the so-called pandemic came in. I would argue it was manufactured, and I've argued that elsewhere. Other people have too. So Congress goes into action. You have shuttered businesses. You have people unemployed. There's a need to surge expenditures. Well, the Federal Reserve will claim, we're the ones responsible for that expenditure of money. It's over $2 trillion, by the way, the taxpayer will put up, thanks to Congress, to cover for the stricken, the common man, common woman who are stricken. The Fed will claim they're the ones responsible for the $2 trillion, but no, they're not. Instead, they're discreetly dropping $3 trillion in the pockets of their friends. Now, all this discussion I'm giving you, I go on at length and substantiate in my most recent book, which is called The Fed's End Game, Handing America Over to the Globalists and How to Stop It, which is available on Amazon. So you see now that this going direct has a number of elements to it. Well, it's a success for the super rich. So in June of 2020, along comes Larry Fink again, and he said, we've done so well with going direct, we should make it permanent, and let's call it policy revolution. Well, you see that we have a bottoming out of the market relative to GDP here about 2023, and then it begins, the stock market's value relative to GDP begins to climb again. And now we come into 2026. It's now stock market relative to GDP is 230%. It's even higher than it was in 2020. This can't go on much longer, and the inflationary effects are devastating. So what's going to happen? Well, could the timing of the Iran war be coincided with this need to prick the bubble? And by the way, we're not just talking about a stock market bubble. We're talking about a real estate bubble, the everything bubble. Could it be involved? Maybe so. Look at the confluence of negative factors. You have extra, unusual military expenditures that were not budgeted for. You have interest rates staying high. You have now oil prices skyrocketing. You've got the conditions to trigger a general collapse of the market, of the economy as a whole, as well as of the stock market. We're not saying it's going to happen, but it looks like the conditions are coming to the fore. So you could do a replay of going direct. Well, because the bubbles are bigger, maybe you could transfer even more than $3 trillion this time to your friends, to the friends of the Fed, to the super rich. So we draw the camera back here. What do we really see? We see how wealth is being transferred, in effect, on enormous scales, trillions of dollars from you and I, the common man and woman, to the super rich. If this goes on much longer, there'll be no wealth left for most of us, and they'll have all the money. Kind of echoes of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. You will own nothing, but will you be happy is the question. So what to do to get rid of going direct and to reform our banking and monetary practices? With quite a few things we have to do. The first thing we need to do is understand the magnitude of this grotesquely unfair wealth accumulation of 2020. It was bad enough that they got evidently $3 trillion. It's the fact that the timing of it all. They were able to get rid of bad investment assets. They were able to make better investment decisions, presumably good investment decisions. We already know by the end of the year 2020 that the stock market had recovered and then some. So they're able to broker these trillions of dollars into multiples of trillions of dollars. And think about Bitcoin. They got Bitcoin at a very low price. Look where Bitcoin is now. The second thing you have to understand, and that is the people involved. Virtually every federal institution, federal government institution was involved. I've told you specifically how the Federal Reserve was operating. But what about the Secretary of the Treasury? They were involved in 2020. They provided cover for that exercise. What about the Congress? Again, they provided cover, and they also provided certain funds, which the Fed would claim they're the ones that provided. The bailouts of the Small Business Administration, the Fed would claim that they're the ones who bailed them out, when in fact it was the Congress who did. And Congress didn't blow the whistle on what was happening. And then also the executive branch and Mr. Trump, who was in office at the time. All these individuals had a role in going direct in 2020. That we have to understand that. The third thing we have to do, we have to now go to Congress and insist that they get to the bottom of what happened in 2020, that they hold accountable those individuals who are responsible for what happened in 2020. The fourth thing, they've got to pass legislation to prevent going direct and this abomination called policy revolution from happening again. This has to come to a stop. But then again, we're just getting started. Because why? What is the root of the problem? We've got to go to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is our petrodollar system, which we're maintaining by force in the Persian Gulf. I've made this case in other videos and other fora, so have other individuals. And the petrodollar system, that's why we're probably in that war, is a layer on top of our debt-based money system. This evil, usurious, debt-based money system is the ultimate root of our problems. We've got to reform this debt-based system, reform it deeply. Well, this concludes what I have to say about this momentous topic. Many of the parts of this topic are not getting anywhere nearly enough attention. Please share this video, engage with me. Let us elevate the discourse. While time remains, we can still turn things around, but we've got a lot of work to do.